Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 139. We will begin, as we always do, with what is timely, Leben mit der Zeit. The Parsha this week is Parsha Toldos, and it's also the week when we begin the Rosh Chodesh Kislev, which yesterday, Shabbos Mevarchim, we blessed this month. I also want to mention, being that this evening is the Kinus HaShluchim this weekend, and this evening is a banquet, so I also want to speak about that. This was always the weekend when the Rebbe, on this Shabbos, from the time when the Kinus HaShluchim began, would dedicate a psyche, a talk delivered about Shluchim and about the whole purpose of their Shluchim, which is relevant to each one of us. And he would cite often, actually, this week's Parsha Toldos or Chassiuds, because sometimes the Kinus HaShluchim, the international conference of the Rebbe's ambassadors and emissaries, was the weekend of Chassiuds, sometimes the weekend of Toldos. This weekend was Chassiuds, of course. Going into Toldos, because both of those parshas talk about a shlichus. And Chassiuds is the first mission where Abraham sends, Avram Avinu sends his servant Eliezer, Eved Avram, to go find a wife for Yitzchak. And Parsha Toldos, we also have the theme of shlichus, because you have the idea where Jacob Avinu comes into this world and then goes off at the end of the Parsha to Haran, b'shlichus of his parents send him to Haran to find himself a wife, as well as to escape from Esau. So this theme of shlichus was cited from both these chapters, and of course, in a few weeks from now, Parsha Vayishlach, again, Yaakov sends Vayishlach, Yaakov Malachim, Yaakov sends Malachim, but that is for then. Now, so the concept of shlichus in general is a very fundamental one, as the Rebbe cites in many of his talks. The Likutei Torah and Vayikra, that the truth is the word shliach simply means a messenger. And the concept of shliach, the Alter Rebbe says in Likutei Torah, goes all the way to the highest levels, because anything that's not atzmos, that's not the core and undefined and core reality of God Himself, is already a shliach, because it's a messenger that God is sending. Even Ein Sof, the divine light, is already a shliach, because it's being sent for a purpose. It's only the divine essence that's the Mishaleach ultimately. So even the highest levels, even the divine energy before the Tzimtzum, is already a form of a shlichus, and then of course it evolves. Each level is another shliach. Malach, of course, comes from the word shliach as well, a messenger. And of course, when it comes down to finally and the more tangible levels, you have the shlichus, the yuridus and neshama b'guf, the soul descending into a body, which is the shlichus that we relate to most because it's on this plane. But it's important to note that in all levels you have that same idea, because anything done with a purpose and design is essentially fulfilling a shlichus, a mission. And the Rebbe explains this very beautifully in the Sikha of Chassiuds Tafshin Mem Zayin, where he speaks about Tafshin Mem Vav Mem Zayin, Mem Zayin specifically, where he speaks about the whole evolution of shlichus from the highest levels, as I just said, from Seder Shtalshus, from the cosmic order and even beyond, all the way down to the lowest levels where we talk about the soul entering into the body. But then, within that itself, there are people who actually dedicate their entire lives to be on a mission. And it's important to note that we all are meant to be on the mission, which means we are meant to be serving the purpose for which we were sent to this earth. And the fact that we go to business or do work and have other preoccupations and vocations is only a means to the end of fulfilling the purpose for which we were sent to this world. However, you do have people, especially the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe, of course, took it to another level. They actually sent shluchim, and they're called shluchim, that went to different outposts all over the world, thousands of different places now, that each in their own way are serving the needs of their community, the Jewish needs, as well as also the social needs and cultural needs and spiritual needs of all people in their community. So this week is the Kinus HaShluchim, when they all gather together. I'll talk a little more about the background of it, but I want to talk a bit more about the Parsha Toldos and Rosh Chodesh Kislev in this context. Toldos has many different themes. The central theme of Toldos, of course, is the Toldos means the children of Isaac and Rebekah. And the children were twin twin boys, who would be named Esau and Yaakov, with Esau emerging first and Yaakov afterwards. But these twins were not just plain twins, as the Torah makes it very clear right in the beginning of the chapter, that these twins were two nations. They represent two nations. When Rebekah complained and asked, why is my pregnancy so difficult? She was told by God, you have two nations within you that are battling. And when one rises, the other one will fall. And when the other one rises, the first one will fall. So they represent two archetypes. And this isn't even commentary. This is straight verse. And indeed, they both emerge to this world very different. One becomes, as called, Yaakov is Ish Tom Yeshav Ahalim. He's called the wholesome or the innocent or the seamless person who dwells in the tents and studies, the scholar. And Yaakov is Ish Milchama Yedid Sayid. He's a warrior that knows how to hunt. And they look differently and they act differently. And as they grow, Vayigdol and Arim, as they grow older, it becomes apparent they have very different personalities. And you have the story how Yaakov then, one day Esau is coming from the field, and Yaakov is very hungry and thirsty, and Yaakov sells him the Zid Adashim. He says, if you want to have this beet soup, you have to sell me I'll buy you the first birthrights from you for this pot of food, of this stew. And Esau, being so hungry and thirsty, goes for the deal and sells Jacob his birthright, meaning being the firstborn. And then later in the chapter, you have the second so-called deception, quote unquote, where Yaakov is told by his mother Rebekah that your father Isaac wants to bless Esau, and as a result, she says, when he goes out to bring food to your father, I will dress you up in garments that when your father, who was close to blind or blind, touches you, will feel and think you're Esau, your brother Esau, and you'll take the blessings instead of Esau. Now both these stories, both the spying of the birthright and this deception of Isaac, is tremendously troublesome when you think about it. I mean, the Torah itself is talking about the greatest people of the time, of their generation. Isaac was, of course, a tzaddik, son of Abraham, was a Merkava, we say, a chariot completely dedicated to God. As was Jacob, as was Rebekah. What kind of behavior is this of deception, and how do you explain it? And if someone who's just at a very simple level says, is this who your forefather was? A person who fooled his brother and fooled his father in trying to steal the blessings, as Esau later argued and accused Jacob of. And what is this buying the birthright? He was born first. How could he even buy a birthright? So there are many different answers given in commentaries. The one I want to focus on is the most important one, and I believe the only one really that does justice to the story, because every explanation you give at the end of the day was a deception. However, when you understand Torah as being, as the sages tell us, the Rameh, Mepana, and the Shalah, that the Torah is not just that talks about things below and hints to things above, which means spiritual matters, but the Torah is actually a story of above. It's a story of a spiritual story, a spiritual narrative, the blueprint with which God created existence. So it speaks about things above and hints to things below. Dibra Torah b'lashon b'nei Adam, the Torah speaks in our language. So though ein mikra yetzim b'dei pshutei, which means the verse is literal, but its true story is far more than just the literal. It expresses itself in the literal fashion, but the inside story is the key. And how does the Chassidic masters explain this? And this is where you see the applied Chassidus of a story, that even if you can justify with the behavior, what's the application? What's the lesson to us? Should we be doing what Jacob did? Trying to steal blessings? Trying to fool others? Obviously not. And you say, Ish Tom Yeshav Ahalim, you're saying he's a Ish Tom, he's a Tomim. A Tomim is a person, meaning an innocent person, an honest person, a wholesome person. So let's explain it with an analogy of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Chassidic movement. And the analogy goes like this, that there was a king, an aging and ailing king, and he knew that his time was coming and he wanted to pass on the kingdom to his son, the heir. But being that his child grew up in the palace, he knew he was spoiled. He hadn't earned the right and developed the sensitivity necessary to really be a empathetic and sensitive leader. So what he does is, as painful as it is, he says to his son, I need to send you away from the palace, from the place where you're catered to, where you're spoiled, where you're taken care of, to go out and live among your future subjects and develop and understand what they need, see how they live, and live on their level. And as sad as it is for me to do so, this is going to groom you to be a true and compassionate leader. But because I know that when you go live there, you may forget where you come from, so I will send you a letter several times a year to remind you where you originate from and why you're there, what the purpose of it is. And the sad day comes, his father bids farewell to his child, sends him off to a very distant land in the kingdom where no one knows who he is, and he has to live and earn his own way without any help from anyone. It's difficult, of course, in the beginning, but he's very resourceful, makes his way. And then, as was promised, the father's letter arrives, first letter arrives, and the child wants to celebrate because he remembers now, it reminds him, after a while he had forgotten, and this reminds him of where he comes from. But how do you celebrate here? The people in the town, the people, his friends, his neighbors, and so on, what is he going to tell them? I'm going to be your king one day. They'll either think he's nuts and won't believe him, or they may even be offended. So he decides, he comes with a great idea. He throws a party. And he says, here there'll be a kiddush, a party, a banquet, and food for all, and drinks for all, l'chaim for all, free cocktails. Of course, everybody loves a party, so everybody participates, and they're celebrating and dancing because they have a free party. Good food, good drink, good socializing. And he, meanwhile, is celebrating because he received this letter from his father. And the Baal Shem Tov tells us the moral of this analogy. What's the moral of the story? The king is God. The child is every soul. A soul in heaven, in the palace, lives in a very comfortable way. There are no challenges. There's no health challenges. There's no livelihood challenges. There's no challenges of temptation or seduction or any of the things that this material world tries to seduce us with. And there, everything, the soul is in a divine and a spiritual environment. Everything is very calm and peaceful. God wants, the king wants that the soul earn its way and really access its deepest resources. That cannot happen when it's in its comfort zone. So the soul is sent down to earth, to a foreign land, a land that the soul does not recognize, a material world where materialism dominates. And the expectation is that the soul should obviously not succumb, but realize that its goal is to spiritualize this world. And the soul is made to forget the place it comes from. The Torah tells us that the soul in its mother's womb, for 9 months, we just taught the entire Torah, and then it's made to forget. But in order to keep the connection open, from time to time, God sends a letter, holidays, Shabbat, other reminders. And when the soul receives that message, it wants to celebrate. The problem is the body and the animal soul are not interested. They're busy with their own survival, busy with their own self-interest. So God says, you know what? Shabbat comes a holiday. Prepare festive meals. Prepare good drinks. Say l'chaim. Do whatever it is. So the body is celebrating because it's getting good food. And it's getting a good meal, good drinks. And the soul, meanwhile, is celebrating for which received the message, that why it's here, its purpose, reminding it of its true mission, and so on. So this is the analogy why Jews focus on food on holidays, why we say l'chaim, because how spiritual can that be? Because that's how you get the body and the material world to cooperate and and be integrated into the celebration of the soul. You cannot just escape into a spiritual celebration without some way welcoming the body and the animal soul, because they will disturb the celebration if you don't allow them to partake in it. So it's necessary to keep them also involved. This can explain the whole chapter in such a beautiful way. Jacob and Esau are two archetypes, as I said, two nations. One represents the material, the warrior that knows how to hunt in this material world, and the other represents the scholar, the gentle scholar. But we need to enter into a world where there's a war, where there is a battle, So Yaakov dresses up in the garments of Esau, not to steal the blessings, but to direct the blessings. Because Rebekah recognized that Esau has tremendous power, and that's why he was getting these blessings, but does not know how to harness them on his own. The body in the material world has tremendous power. But without a soul's direction, without an intelligent direction, you don't know how that power can be completely abused or scrounged. So what you do is that Yaakov dresses up in those garments. Yaakov takes the blessings of the firstborn as well as the blessings, not to steal them from him, but to direct the Esau's power through Yaakov's intelligence and Yaakov's soulfulness, with the goal of elevating also the body. So it's not a deception, it's speaking to the language. The only way Esau understands is that he's hungry. The only thing he understands is things on his level, on the basic level. And Jacob understood that the deeper meaning of the blessings is the spiritual victory which is required to dominate and control and tame this world. And then ultimately Jacob and Esau will reunite, as we learn in 2 chapters from now, that when Mashiach comes, they will ultimately reunite, because you'll have body and soul working hand in hand together. So when you think of it that way, when we educate our bodies and our animal soul and our survival level, the survivor within us, the hunter within us, with things that make it feel happy, while we're experiencing transcendence, that's ultimately the way we bring these two together. Of course, that's the mission and that's the shlichus, that's the mission and the purpose for which we were all sent to this earth, is to spiritualize the material universe, to spiritualize our bodies and all our physical needs, and direct and harness them into this, to a higher purpose and higher cause. And that's the story of Yaakov and Esau. There's obviously more to be said to elaborate on this, but the application is also quite obvious. It really carries the entire purpose of our beings. Now, let's move to Rosh Chodesh Kislev. Rosh Chodesh Kislev, especially in Chabad, special holiday because that's the day after the Rebbe had a heart attack at 39 years ago in Tafshin Lamed Ches. He went home after spending a few months in 770, recuperating. So it became a holiday. But it's also the holiday, Rosh Chodesh Kislev was the day the Rebbe chose to go home. It wasn't just a day, because it's the beginning of the month that's filled with Chassidic power, and that is going in the order of the month. You have in this month the 9th of Kislev. The 9th of Kislev is the birthday and the yahrzeit of the Mittler Rebbe. The 10th of Kislev is the redemption, the liberation of the Mittler Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe. Then you have Yudalit Kislev, the Rebbe's anniversary, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzins' anniversary. You have Yutes Kislev, the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, the redemption and liberation of the Alter Rebbe. And you have other days in this month that are significant in the same fashion. And of course it concludes with the Festival of Lights, Shemen, taking the pure oil, and Hanukkah, which celebrates also, Shemen, the oil is the inner secrets, the secrets of the Torah. So this is a month filled with days that empower us to take our own innermost transcendent forces, our innermost unconscious beings, the pnimius, and revealing it to the world around us, which is taking the resources of our soul and bringing it out into the material world. The theme of Toldos. So it's not incidental that Toldos has that theme, the theme of taking the soul and using the material world as fuel, harnessing it and directing it and guiding it toward the purpose for which it was created, without which the soul would be very difficult to do or impossible to do. And ultimately, when we think in terms of the completion of the purpose, it's about a total integration, total fusion of body and soul, form and function, matter and spirit, the outer and the inner. And that is the theme of Kislev in general, and Rosh Chodesh Kislev, of course. So when the Rebbe who went through the difficult heart attack came back to his strength, and not only to his strength, to even greater strength, and saw the whole experience as being as a springboard to develop even further Chassidus and develop the activities. And we see after 1978, after the heart attack and after the Rebbe's healing and recuperation, you see that everything doubled and tripled, if not more than, in the activities and the reach that then compared to was before that evening when he had the heart attack, that Shmini Atzeret. Okay. With that, let's go into the history question, the history and background. This week marks the 33rd Annual International Kinus HaShluchim, as I mentioned, bringing thousands of shluchim together from all over the world. What is the history and background of this conference? How did it evolve into such a large-scale and far-reaching event? So as we speak, you have around 5,000 people gathered in Brooklyn, downtown Brooklyn, which are literally from every corner of the world, literally, all as emissaries, ambassadors of the Rebbe, to bring Torah and Chassidic, the Fotzes, spreading of Yiddishkeit, and spreading of the morals and ethics of Torah values to each corner of the world. So the concept of Shlichus itself, I mentioned earlier, the previous Lubavitch Rebbe had already sent people to different towns, but on a smaller scale. And even earlier, as the Rebbe brings in that Sikha, in the talk I cited earlier, Chozer Tov Shemem Zayin, which is actually 30 years ago, he cites there that the Baal Shem Tov also sent messengers, but the full-blown opportunity, and obviously the possibility to do so really didn't exist earlier, was especially in 1950 when the Rebbe assumed leadership. And a little while after that, he began to send shluchim, and no one knew at the time how serious it was in the sense, was he going to send 10, 20, 30? But then in the 60s, it became obvious that this was meant to be the standard, that the Rebbe wanted everyone possible to go out on outposts, wherever they may be, cities and countries all around the world, and build these outposts of building institutions, educational institutions, religious institutions, above all, places that you can inspire and awaken and educate and do everything and serve all the needs, the Jewish, social, as I mentioned, and other needs of each respective community. And it succeeded beyond any measure of anyone's expectation. Today is 23 years since the Rebbe physically is not with us, and it only continues to exponentially grow in ways, again, that are hard to imagine, anyone ever imagining that this can be without the Rebbe physically here, yet it has its momentum, it has that life that the Rebbe infused in it. So the concept of Shlichus goes back all the way, as I mentioned before, all the way to the beginning of Seder Shtalshus, God choosing to create a universe, choosing to emanate energy, choosing anything is already the concept. But if you take it to the fullest length, it's epitomized in the actual sending of people from the community to go to outposts all over the world and do that type of mission. But it's all the same theme of going from a more spiritual place, from a more divine place, to a place that may be initially darker or initially more of an outskirt, and turn that also into a place of light. As the Rebbe told Rabbi Zalman Posen, the Frierdiker Rebbe, Rabbi Zalman Posen was one of the first emissaries that the Rebbe sent in the 1940s, the previous Rebbe, I should say, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. And he ended up being in Nashville, Tennessee. So when he was a student, I heard the story from him. When he was a student, so then he was sent for the summer, for a month, for a week, to go to different towns to do whatever it is to reach the Jews of the community and try to inspire them and teach them and share with them, for them books and pamphlets and other things to make them aware of their Judaism. So once when the previous Rebbe sent him, I'm not sure what town it was, so the previous Rebbe sends that he was tentative because, he didn't know whether he has the confidence to do it. Now the previous Rebbe had suffered a stroke, so his speech wasn't so clear. But he used his hands, and his hands were very part of also understanding what he was saying, because he was very descriptive with his hands of what he wants to communicate. So he said to Rabbi Zalman Posen, he said the following to Rebbe, that when he recognized the tentativeness, he said, when a soul has to come down to earth, it doesn't want to go. Why? Because above is varim und lichtig, it's warm and illuminated. And below, on earth, it's kalt and finster, it's cold and dark. So why would a soul want to go? So what do? The Rebbe continued. They command the soul, and he took his finger and said like this, they command the soul that you have to go down. Rabbi Zalman told me that the finger, he remembers the trembling fingers like slowly going down, down, down. To go from the place that's light, bright, and warm to a place that's cold and dark. And when you come down below, to cause and create and bring light and warmth and illuminate and warm this dark and cold place. So he said when he did go, of course he followed instructions, Whenever he had a down moment, whenever it was a little difficult, he would just imagine, close his eyes, imagine the finger. Imagine the finger going down, and felt that the finger, he was following the finger, and the finger was following him, and giving him the strength that wherever he'll be, he has the finger and the strength of the Rebbe with him. It's a tremendous story that captures, in essence, really all of our challenges, all of our existential challenges, wherever we may be, and at times we feel maybe lost, maybe unfocused, maybe overwhelmed, or whatever it may be. So it's important to remember you're not going alone, you're sent. That's what a shliach means. A shliach means you were sent by someone. And that one who sends you gave you power. Obviously the mishaleach, the ultimate mishaleach, is God himself, as I said before. Every level is God sending us to that place and giving us the strength necessary to do what we have to accomplish there. So this is the concept of shlichus. As the shlichus system grew, obviously, even informally, it makes sense that anyone going out would consult with friends and consult with the veterans and those that were there before, because you get good advice. But in the year, in the summer of 1983, that would be Parsha Ekev Tafshin Mem Gimel. So there was a number of shluchim that the Rebbe had sent to the Holy Land, to Israel. So they had a kinus that year. They had a gathering together, that they came together, and the Rebbe spoke about it on that Shabbos. And then he said, Halavai, it should also be done here. So that's where the concept of the Shluchim conference was born that summer, in 1983. And then plans began to make also a kinus here in the United States. The next year, 1984, I should say 1983, the end of 83, because the kinus is around November usually. So November, from basically the summer of, it's pretty close. The summer was, let's say, August 83. So by November 83, the first kinus happened with 65 shluchim participated. The Rebbe spoke a talk about it that year. And then, obviously, it began to grow from year to year. But then it was still the American emissaries. In Chayesara Tafshin Memches, the Rebbe gave instructions that year, which would be the year of 1987. The November 87 was the first international to bring everybody together from all over the world, which of course definitely added a whole new dimension of both the number, quantity, and quality. And ever since, you've had this Kinus HaShluchim of the International Kinus HaShluchim, international conference, growing from year to year. Obviously, as the shluchim grow, and people who are working for them, and more shluchim going out, and so on. I should mention, at some point the Rebbe also spoke about the shluchos, the women emissaries, the wives of the shluchim, but not just as wives, but as partners. And so, in 1991 was the first international conference for the women emissaries and ambassadors. And that too has been growing from year to year. So here we are in 2016. It's the year Tafshinai Zayin, 2016. And you have close to 5,000 people gathering. I'd say maybe 3,000 of them are shluchim. They bring their supporters, they bring friends, family, colleagues, and so on. And that's a testimony to a success story, you can say. Because as I said, it grows from year to year. They have the roll call. Literally every country in the world is represented. Cities, the most obscure and far-flung cities that also are represented. And it's just a beautiful sight to behold. But above all, it's the celebration of Judaism, celebration of the universal message of Judaism, which is to illuminate this dark and cold world. Okay. With that, let us go to some questions that are asked, related, some more related, some less related to the topics that we're discussing. Obviously, everything is connected. But let's go to a question, which is just a question that came in. Is anxiety really a cry from the soul? So a writer writes the following. I just came across one of your video clips in which you describe anxiety as the cry of a parched soul. Can you please elaborate on that? What does this mean? Every time someone feels anxious, should they assume its cause is a spiritual discomfort? If so, how is one expected to remedy something that's so deep-rooted and elusive? This doesn't seem to leave any room for contemporary therapies as they don't address soul problems. Yes. So let's begin very basic, explaining what this means. I don't want to sound morbid, but someone that is not alive, a dead person, cannot have anxiety, as we know. So anxiety is a prerequisite for anxiety or stress or anything, is that you're alive. That means it's something connected to being alive and something connected to feeling. So let's think of it this way. If you see a machine that's not working well, and I'm not going to use the word anxious, an anxious machine, because it may not be applicable, but you see something is very, you see something extremely running very slowly, or very stressed and so on, you know that something isn't flowing properly. The same is with anxiety. Anxiety is an expression of something not flowing properly. A person who is not anxious, is someone that everything is flowing properly. So what could not be flowing properly? One of the main reasons is that the soul feels thirsty or hungry and not getting fed. So the way it speaks to us is through being anxious. The body speaks to us when it's not hungry. When it's hungry, it tells you it's hungry. You feel hunger pangs, or thirst, or fatigue. But the soul, how does the soul speak to us? The soul speaks to us by making us anxious. Something is missing. So you feel an anxiety, you feel an angst. It's actually the restlessness of the soul, the flickering soul, which is like compared to a flame that is trying to remind us, do something about my psychic and spiritual needs. That was essentially the point that I was making. As a matter of fact, I was going to look it up. I spoke about it very early on in MyLife, Chassidus Applied, a talk the Rebbe gave actually in the middle of the talk. He was talking to a Yechidus Klolis, which was a collective private audience to a group of people. It was in the early 80s. And the Rebbe was talking about, it was concluding his talk and giving a blessing that everything should be besimcha v'tuv levov, happy, and with a happy and glad heart. And you hear in the background the child suddenly cry. And the Rebbe speaks about the child crying. What the Rebbe says is that even when a child cries, it should also be besimcha. You know why? Because a child crying, we may think a child is crying because the child is uncomfortable, or the child wants a candy, or deprived of something. But the truth is the child is crying because it's the cry of the soul that wants to connect to God. And it expresses itself through a cry. And that's what really the deeper meaning between the cry. It may manifest itself in something more tangible, but the root of the cry comes from there. So when a person cries out, rest assured, it's a cry of the soul asking for help. Even if you stub your toe or some other thing, okay, so there you could say it's a cry of pain. It's true. But there's always a reflection of some deeper pain inside when a person cries out. And I'm not going to get into the more superficial reasons, as I just said, stub the toe doesn't mean necessarily that's the cry of the soul, but a cry that affects us deeply, and form of anxiety, a form of stress, is the soul speaking to us. And yes, indeed, what it means is that you have to do something with your soul's needs. And your soul's needs not necessarily means purely religious needs. Soul's needs means also peace of mind. It means good connections. If your marriage is not going well, obviously it's going to create anxiety. If a person is not fulfilling their purpose, it's going to create anxiety. So what we have to do is remedy that. And it's not deep-rooted and elusive. You just like you have physical doctors, you need a spiritual doctor. You need someone who can identify what could be the causes. Sometimes you can identify yourself by asking yourself the question, am I living up to my potential? Am I fulfilling my mission in this world? And other questions that can help identify what area is the soul, is the deficiency of the soul that needs nurturing and needs nutrients and needs exercise to strengthen its power. About contemporary therapies, well, some of them very much focus on the same idea. They realize when you see someone crying or out in distress or anxiety, that's also a sign of something missing, and they often have something to offer. They sometimes don't have to offer. I've discussed this many times, that conventional secular therapy may solve some issues, but obviously if you can introduce the Chassidic and the spiritual dimension that the Torah offers us, you'll have a far more full-blown and full-bodied psychological interventions and modalities that can help address the human conditions, struggles, and anxieties. Okay, next question. Next question is, let me see. Is there a remedy for my resignation? I'm constantly moving, but my actions feel lifeless. I think I surrendered to living my life on autopilot, just reacting to whatever gets thrown my way. Proactive is a word belonging to my past. I feel resigned and unmotivated to initiate positivity in my day. What can I do about my feelings of resignation? So resignation, the word for it in Hebrew is yush, and there are many letters from the Rebbe about it. There are also many thoughts in Chassidic that address the concept of resignation. Obviously, negating it in every possible way, because betachan, trust, immediately means trust in God, and faith in God, especially trust, negates any concept of resignation. Because there's no such thing as impossible, there's no such thing as all is lost, there's no such thing as fatalism. It's fatalism. Now, this doesn't mean we always get what we want, because sometimes God has a different plan for us. So we have to accept that as well. But the idea of being resigned is just not acceptable. So among many different notes from the Rebbe, there's one that just came my way recently, so I thought appropriate to read, and I could also show it to you, as I often do. This is actually a handwritten note from the Rebbe addressing this concept of resignation. I'll translate it quickly. To that which you mentioned, the writer of this letter mentions about yush, about resignation, etc. It's a surprise that he doesn't know that the test of throwing in thoughts of resignation inside of a feelings of resignation inside of a person, is from the most shrewd and I would say shrewd and muvakim. How would we translate muvakim? Professional, you can even say, of the Yetzer Hara to stop a person and to refrain and cause a person to stop doing what they should be doing. So it's basically from the best weapons and the most professional, the most, trying to look for the right word, advanced weapons of the Yetzer Hara, of the evil inclination, to stop a person from fulfilling his responsibility. The Rebbe's words. And what's the argument that it makes? Because if you're resigned, what can you demand? Why should I make any effort? It's impossible to do anything anyway. So the Yetzer Hara convinces us that if you're resigned, it causes you simply not to do anything, because you say nothing's going to help anyway. And he may have also already announced to himself and to others and to himself that he's completely resigned, God forbid. So in other words, making it very clear that resignation does not come from any positive force inside of us. It comes from a force that has actually been designated by God to do everything possible to stop us from fulfilling our responsibility. And then the Rebbe concludes like this: Raya Mukshis, a tangible proof that resignation comes from the Yetzer Hara is this: because resignation does not in any way diminish a person's physical and material desires. If a person was really weakened by it, then you would say they're also weakened and they don't have any interest in taivas, in desires and temptations that satisfy our instant gratification. The fact that it doesn't weaken that means it's coming from the negative place, because it's telling you don't do what you should be doing and do this. So this is just one example among many about the negative energy of yush, which really gets into negative energy in general. You look at young children, and I'm elaborating a bit on this, they have no resignation. Their resignation can only come from one thing, from adults that project on them the concept of resignation. For them, everything is possible. Whatever then, maybe in a child's mind is not yet fully developed, but why should something be difficult to do? Why should something be impossible to do? Unless someone tells them, or someone's disappointed. Parents, educators, others that walk around disappointed, bitter, angry, and having not fulfilled their dreams, obviously will project such an energy. So we are naturally people who have hope, and we have dreams, and we have aspirations. So when there's a voice inside of us that tells us, no, Be resigned, that's what the Rebbe is saying. No, that's coming from a negative place, and the proof is it doesn't tell you to be resigned in areas that you find personal pleasure in. So that's the answer. Now, how does one person deal with that? The question being, first I wanted to just address is the remedy, therefore, is to expose and defang the enemy by exposing it at its root. It's an enemy that's essentially, think of a toxin that's been injected in you. If you convince yourself it's not a toxin, then you could say, that's who I am. But if you know it's a toxin, then you'll get medicine, you'll do the right exercises to eliminate and neutralize that toxin. Yiush, resignation, is a toxic force coming from a negative a voice inside of us trying to weaken our resolve or completely eliminate our resolve by saying it's impossible. Can't. It's not for me. When you recognize that, that's the remedy. You begin weakening by recognizing that voice as being exactly that it is, an enemy of yours that you should, in every way possible, to eliminate. Okay. Next question. Next question is, are cartoons okay for kids? With all the noise and unsolicited entertainment children have at their fingertips nowadays, it leaves us wondering what is okay to expose them to. What is the Chassidic approach to cartoons? Is the seemingly harmless exaggeration of characters and caricatures something we should keep our children away from? Or is it indeed harmless fun? Okay. Well, another topic which is not for now is the whole issue of iPads, iPhones, mobile phones, smartphones, and children's use of them and almost addiction to them. I don't want to address that because it's a different topic. But I do want to address the issue, especially you bring up cartoons and what you expose children to, what they should see and not see. So again, I found a very interesting answer from the Rebbe that recently came my way. They asked the Rebbe, there was a magazine for children called Mashiach Times, that the Chassidus Hashem, which is an organization established by the Rebbe in 1980, meaning the Army of Hashem, basically a children's organization gathering children together and inspiring them in every possible way, received an answer from the Rebbe. The editors of that magazine received an answer about imagery, cartoons in this magazine. And here's what the Rebbe writes. The newspaper or magazine is primarily for young children and very young children. So therefore, educators who are veteran educators, experienced educators of children, need to be the ones involved in determining what they're exposed to and what they're not. Then the Rebbe adds, however, a few of his own thoughts. In general, they shouldn't have images of animals that are not pure, not clean. This is consistent with, of course, the talk of the Rebbe that I spoke about a while back, Chav Cheshvan Tavshin Mem Daled, which was 1983, talks about using imagery of kosher animals and things that are pleasant, exposing children only to pure things as much as possible. The next thing, and here's the cartoon, a caricature, interesting. He says, it's not kedai, it's not worthy that people, meaning the images that the cartoonists make and artists make of people, should be exclusive, specifically not natural, meaning like a caricature, like for example, extra fat or a large nose, a more than unusually large nose, more than natural. The Rebbe is saying it's not worthwhile doing that. And similarly, even though this has become customary in comics, the Rebbe says, in my opinion, it's a fundamental educational mistake, great educational mistake, because kol the pasha, the normal Yosher, that which is simpler and more normal, especially to children, the better it is. And then he adds something interestingly. Well, the daitian, in my opinion, also for adults, the ein kama came in, here's not the place to elaborate, because obviously he wasn't talking about that. In other words, the idea of exaggerating facial features, whether it's, as he says, overweight, well, not overweight, actually, very fat, or unnaturally features of human beings is not proper education, because you're essentially creating something false imagery in children's minds. Now, you would think it's something harmless and innocent, a caricature, a cartoon, but it essentially feeds into the idea of distortions. Recently there's news about false news reports online. In a sense, real characters are false projections and false images of what they're trying to convey. So there you have your answer regarding this issue. And it also demonstrates, if you think about it, this is not some type of prudish approach, God forbid. It's a sensitivity of what you're communicating to others. The fact that we live in a callous world, where obviously there's freedom of speech and people can say and write whatever they like and draw things and make fun and so on, doesn't mean that we have to buy into this low standard. The whole Torah, Judaism, and the Rebbe, of course, representing that, Chassidus, is to lift the standard, not to succumb to it. Lift the standard means to bring a little more honesty, to bring a little more innocence and purity into the minds of children and also adults, as I just read. So it's a great exercise in discussing matters like this. We don't have to buy into all of this. We're trying to bring people to a purer place. And in a subtle way, all these type of distortions create distortions, period. We're not even getting into the distortions of advertising and marketing and so on, which of course broadens the topic quite extensively. Okay. I'd love to hear your comments on this stuff because it's very interesting, but that will suffice for that. The next question. The next question is, what's wrong with a handshake? A high five, a pat on the back, a handshake. These all seem to be innocuous, nothing more than casual and innocent social gestures between people. Yet Orthodox Judaism, halacha, prohibits such interaction between genders. Isn't it a bit extreme to assume that a handshake might lead to something more? Are we perverting informal touch by applying a sexual air to it? Why doesn't the fear of embarrassing someone else trump a rule that's set in place only as a precautionary measure? Okay, so we have talked about the concept of tznius, shomar negiah, and so on. So let's say the following. Taking the cue of what I just mentioned about sensitivity, and I'm not even getting right now into the halacha, the law of it, I'll mention shortly. We were sent to this world on a mission, as I've been discussing and focusing, especially as a tribute to this weekend of when the shluchim and the emissaries come together. We were sent to this world on a mission. The mission is not to become resigned, or to succumb, or to compromise the highest spiritual integrity that we're capable of. It's to be leaders and proactive forces of change, to create a revolution that does not buy into and compromise itself, but brings light and proactively transforms the world. That's what our forefather Abraham did, that's what Sarah did, and that's what all our leaders did. We brought civilization to the world because we absolutely rejected conformity to the pagan ways of old, to self-interest, to selfishness, and to material forces that define that more important than anything is power, money, pleasure, and instant gratification. Yes, it's a battle because you have to deal with many forces out there that are almost demanding to be like them and feel threatened when you stand up with higher values. That's been our story. Anyone of spiritual integrity in history had to deal with a community, with nations, with powers that saw them as a threat because they challenged. Mordechai wouldn't bow to Haman. You can say, what's the big thing? Bow to him. He's the head of the office. He's the head of the country. And because of that, there were severe consequences. The Jews arrived at the brink of genocide because Haman was so infuriated by it. Because there's a message. The message is we're here on a mission to elevate and transform the world, not to become part of it. Now, this isn't pointing fingers at anyone. This is the worldly forces, those that learn Chassidus know that God created a world, dira b'tachtenim. Tachtenim means, as the Alter Rebbe writes in chapter 36 in Tanya, tachtenim, it doesn't mean the lowest in space, but the lowest in spiritual revelation, that there is no spiritual revelation. Going back to the words of the previous Rebbe, it's cold and dark. It's a lonely world, and a lonely existential world. It's a hostile world. To fight for for values, to fight for honesty, is uphill battle at times. It's a deceptive world. It's a duplicitous world. Many things. But that's on the surface, and intentionally so, in order for us to come, not only to not become part of it, but to transform it. So when you think in those terms, then everything we approach in life, whether it's caricatures or whether it's shaking someone's hand, has to be approached with a higher sensitivity, a higher consciousness. Nothing is just casual. Man and woman, by definition, are two genders, yes, and they have an attraction to each other. That's undeniable. And as the Bible puts it, because that's the way God created us. The reason being, because they were once part of one whole. God created the human being in the divine image, male and female, He created them, and then separated them. So there's a sexual, physical attraction between men and women, which is fine. That's why there is the opportunity for them to join in a sacred marriage, and the contrary, create a sacred union, build a beautiful family. But it's not a casual thing, male and female interaction. It's always a spiritual thing, and it's always a sensual thing, and it's always in some way a sexual thing. So it's not about whether a handshake is going to lead to something. It's about the sensitivity. Nothing is casual. If the entire world respected that and no one shook hands with each other, no one would have a problem. They wouldn't say, you're being prudish, you're being childish, it's extreme. It just happens to be that the world has lost its sensitivity. The world's sensitivity and standards have simply become very, very loose and shallow. Is that why we should give in to that? Is it a challenge? Of course it's a challenge. So we have to find ways to do it. So it's not about the handshake per se, it's about the sensitivity to even small matters, yes. Small matters matter. A touch is very sacred. A touch is very sensual. The fact that some people don't see it as such is because they become callous. They become insensitive. So the Torah in its wisdom understands that even this minor handshake, not just what it can lead to, is already an interaction that should be taken in a respectful way. It shouldn't be, oh, big thing, we all shake each other, we all touch each other, no big thing, it's common practice. Now I understand their social standards, and we don't have to go to war against them in the sense, no, I'm not going to shake anyone's hand and make it very, expressed in a very obnoxious way. That's why you have to do it in a subtle way. And you have stories where the queen in Denmark or in England who understood when they were explained what this is. It has to be explained with beauty and grace. And you know something? It may even change the way the world starts treating things in a much more sensitive way. Sanctity is a precious commodity today, and we have to preserve it. Now, as far as the actual handshake, since this is not a platform, halachic platform, the fact of the matter is there are halachic sources for this. There is a difference of an opinion between poskim, between those that rule legally on these matters, whether touching someone only in the form of affection is a factor, or is it any touch? But there's clearly those that prohibit any form of touch, even with a glove, frankly. There's a Sefer Chassidim, a famous Sefer Chassidim that talks about that, and I could tell you where that is, page 796. Not sure what siman it is, but there are a number of sources. You can find them online. So you have the Rambam, you have the Ramban, Sefer HaMitzvos Leisa Seth 353 discusses it. Rabbeinu Yoina takes even stronger stands than the Rambam, and that is, let me see if I have the source for the Rabbeinu Yoina. I don't have it right here with me. But bottom line is there's a discussion about this, and regardless, the overarching theme is what I just described, the sensitivity, more than just all the details of it. And yes, there is the concept of also, just like there's the laws of Yichud, there are the walls we put up in order to prevent challenges. You don't have to wait till it's very difficult or too late. You put up certain guidelines that maintain a sanctity, maintain an integrity, which is done all the time. You see that even in the business world. There are guidelines. There are sometimes walls put up in order to protect that there shouldn't come to a temptation or anything of that nature as well. So it's not as crazy as it may sound when you initially think about it. It actually describes a higher standard, and that's a very powerful thing to teach to ourselves, to our children, and to the world around us. Next question. Retributive justice. Is there a difference between Judaism and others? How can we condemn the brutal way radical Islam punishes and kills people when our own Torah commands us to kill in similar ways? What is the difference between retributive justice in Judaism, the 4 types of capital punishment, for example, skila, sreifa, hereg, chenek, and the same type of punishments in other religions? Thank you for your wonderful classes. Another person writes, greatly appreciate them. How can we answer people who don't understand how the Torah's methods of killing are different than radical religious killings today? How can we differentiate between the two? Okay, good question. So first of all, let's begin with something critical. The Torah is a Torah's chesed. It's a Torah of kindness. Its paths are pleasant paths, and all its roads are peaceful ones. The entire Torah was not given except to bring peace to this world, as Maimonides Paschins brings at the end of the laws of Hanukkah. So once you know that axiom, it's a given, and the reason for it is very obvious, because it's God's Torah. And God is Teva HaTev, Teva HaTev Lahetiv. God is a kind, compassionate God, and therefore His Torah is a kind Torah. If you see in the Torah something that doesn't seem kind to our understanding or eyes, it means that we don't understand it. We don't understand the kindness in it. And we need to dig deeper. We don't say, hey, I don't understand, therefore the Torah is not kind. No, that's a fundamental principle. So the concept of capital punishment in the Torah, yes, is a little hard to understand. How is that kind? But when you start delving into it, and you start seeing how the Torah's conditions of where capital punishment is allowed and how rare it happened, and you see the power of it as a deterrent, and how rarely it actually was actualized, and the conditions necessary to actually actualize it, you realize that, number one, it's the element of it is essentially a deterrent, and number two, even when it's done, is because when a person, all the conditions they don't pass, becomes dangerous to others, so killing them is not a nice thing to do, but it's literally saving another person's life. Because they're in that type of situation. It's like self-defense. No one says war is good. No one says defending and killing someone before you get killed is good. Wouldn't need it. But we live in a world where sometimes that becomes the kind thing to do, because it's preserving life. The methods used in the Torah, if you start studying, you'll see, especially in those times, were the kindest ways that you can do it. What I mean kindest, the most painless fashion. Again, not to say it's great. The whole thing is not great. We want a world where people live beautifully and follow what God wants and live and are not dangerous to each other, so we wouldn't need to have this entire thing. But if in case there is a need, and it's not just a deterrent because all the conditions met, and they're very rare, it was rare, a Bezdin, a court of law that exercised capital punishment once in 70 years, in some opinions, was labeled a murderous court. Why was it a murderous court? They were not corrupt because the Torah abhorred capital punishment, even when it was necessary. We don't gloat, and we're not happy, and we don't celebrate. That's a critical component. Number two, there's the due process, as I've just been discussing. I'll just give you one example to the extreme. You know, kind of witnesses you need. You need warnings. You need the warning that they'd be punished that way. And then you need a court of law that cannot be unanimous. If 71 people in the Sanhedrin all voted that somebody, all ruled that somebody deserves capital punishment, you know that they're acquitted. Because the Torah feels that if 71 people, not one could have come up with some type of question or doubt, something's wrong. Even though they may not be corrupt, maybe great rabbis and scholars. Because the Torah goes everywhere, goes out of its way. V'shofto ha'eda, v'hitzilu ha'eda is the expression in the Bible. Judge the people, v'hitzilu, and preserve them. The goal is not vengeance. The goal is not killing. The goal is to make them a holier and more sacred people. Now, because we live in a difficult world, and we live in a world where people can unfortunately become so destructive to themselves and to others, there is that option. And but due process. Compare that to other religions. You tell me what happened in the Middle Ages with the Crusaders and others, the Inquisitions. You tell me what's happening with Muslim extremists. First of all, I'd love to see the due process. You're talking about beheadings, burnings, and killings that are just like a lynch mob. That's one. Number two, you see the gloating, you see the celebration, you don't see the sanctity. As I said, if it happened once in 70 years, it was considered to be already a tragedy. That whole mood is not there. Did they take some of the ideas from the Bible? Yeah, but tremendously distorted and tremendously obscenely distorted. So you have to understand where the axioms are and what's presented. Is it pleasant? As I said again, it's not. But you have to, at the end of the day, say that this is the best possible way, the best of the worst when you're dealing with Hitlers or you're dealing with Nazis, and there's a due process even there. I mean, you demonstrate that, and then Torah has its rules and guidelines. So I would say it's completely not even comparable, and you can't even put them in the same league. Okay. And on a related note, I would suggest go to our site, meaningfullife.com. There's two articles called Religious Violence that doesn't talk so much about this per se, but it talks more about the killing of obliterating Amalek and Leschai Kol Neshama when they went into the land of Israel. And you see there that also seems to be very aggressive. But when you really look into it, you'll see the Torah's chesed in ways that it'd be quite surprising. The fact that others have distorted these verses, as I said, other religions, that's their problem. That doesn't mean that's what the Torah was intending. Okay. Let's go over to the Chassidus question, and then the three essays. It's a follow-up to last week. So here's the question. Thanks for explaining Or Yosher and Or Chozer and Avodah, which was in last week's episode. Or Yosher or Chozer we can call direct light and refractive light. So, if I remember correctly, Chassidus also discusses how Or Yosher and Or Chozer are forces that shape Seder Shtalshus, the cosmic order of creation. They strike each other and create letters. Can you please elaborate on that? Okay, we shall. So firstly, let's start with the source. Ayin Beis, chapter 9, discusses this, citing an Eitz Chaim, which is Eitz Chaim is from the writings of the Reb Chaim Vital, Kislev Arizal, the Arizal's teachings. Shara Kudim, chapter 5, where he brings the idea, the exact expression that the creation of the containers, kelim, is through Begiyas ha'er Yosher va'er Chozer, through the striking of the Or Yosher, the direct light, and the refractive light striking each other. Shemakim zeh bezeh, and through that letters, when two things strike each other, something shatters, so to speak. So letters fall. From there, those letters were created the containers. The Rebbe Rashab in chapter 9 in Ayin Beis, which is volume 1 right in the beginning, cites and says that this is explained by the Alter Rebbe, and I'll give you the source. In the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim is Halach Loznia. This was on his journey in Loznia, so it's from earlier discourses, page 222 and on. And also, the Rebbe Rashab in the Maimorim in Tofrei Samach Hey, which would be Tofrei Samach Hey, Sefer Maimorim Tofrei Samach Hey, page 289 and on. And he gives an example, the Alter Rebbe does. The example he gives of two contradictory ideas that emerge when two people are studying together and they're arguing the point, and one person is disagreeing with the other. So these two arguments clash, strike each other, and something new emerges from that, a new idea. The new idea may not be as intense and as powerful as a regular flowing idea would have just been Or Yosher, just a flowing idea. But it does emerge, a new idea comes out due to all the questions. He says that's where the kelim, the letters that create the kelim. So they're not as powerful as energy, but they're a result of a clash of two disagreeing forces, which would be the Or Yosher or Chozer. So think of a teacher and a student. The teacher has the ideas. The student challenges the teacher. So that clash, that challenge brings out new ideas. So that's where Or Yosher or Chozer come to be. Now, obviously, this is a little different context than what I discussed last week, even though it's related to it. Because there I was discussing two paths, two tracks, so to speak. The track of the sunlight and moonlight. Not so much how sunlight and moonlight clash with each other, but rather sunlight being direct light, and moonlight being the light that comes from the bottom up, from within. But there is the element that the Eitz Chaim talks about how they clash each other. It's interesting, in Ayin Beis itself, later, chapter 62, brings another Eitz Chaim, the same Shara Kudim, chapter 1, that says, Makif and Pnimi, the transcendent light and transcendent energy and the immanent energy also strike each other and clash and create Kalim. But that is another discussion, just mentioning it to be thorough. So how that applies to in our lives is that these two energies are both important, as we've discussed, two different tracks, but there are times, especially in the creation of things, that the clash of them actually has a result that can bring something new into the picture. It may not be, as I said, the power of an original idea, and that the derivatives of that original idea, like he says here, that's a svara ketana be'erech etzem hasaga from the original idea, but what does come out of it is something new, an innovation. So that's how even striking forces can actually bring some benefit if you do that in the proper way. So conflicts can actually end up creating something new, which is a great way to deal with conflict management as well. Okay, now let's move to the essays. And the essays are 3 essays. We begin with essay, What's Trust Got to Do with It? By Nili Navot, age 36, Tzfat, Israel. So this essay is about trust, as the title implies. And that is a few weeks ago, she writes, on my way home, I caught myself feeling anxious. I wasn't having a panic attack or anything severe, just feeling a general anxiety for no obvious reason. I literally stopped on the street for a moment and quieted my mind. I then applied a Chassidic concept I learned, which will be discussed in this essay, and the result was remarkable. The very next moment, not only did my anxiety dissipate, but my emotions were replaced with a sense of security, calmness, and love. This essay hopes to bring to light that antidote to anxiety called bitachon, trust, and goes into a long, relatively elaborate discussion on the power of trust, using also the Chavis Halavav Shara Bitachon, the gate of trust from the Rabachia, Rabbeinu Bachai of Chavis Halavaz, and the Chassidic talks about trach good, v'zayin good, think good, and it will be good. And addresses it in the psychological context, where today's contemporary psychologists term this time that we live in the age of anxiety, and is based so much on the loss of connectivity, decline in trust in other people, and how trust in God is ultimately the ultimate trust, citing the 7 levels of trust that the Sheikh Chavis Halavavis, that's duties of the heart, elaborates on, and then brings, of course, the Chassidus that takes it to another dimension where you actually can open up new channels by being positive. So it's a well-done essay, and trust, and basically, and I should add a very fundamental point, that the trust Chassidus talks about is not about trust in ourselves, as opposed to many psychological theories that are based on increasing compassion, confidence, expression, and so on. But it's rather trust in something greater than ourselves, God. It's a very powerful distinction. So therefore, it's a bitachon aimed towards something above and beyond the self. And as I said, an excellent essay. And you can read it, you can receive it by subscribing to our weekly newsletter at meaningfullife.com, or going to meaningfullife.com/MyLife/essays-2016. Next essay is Silencing the Background Noise by Levi Kosofsky, age 29, educator, Longmeadow, Massachusetts. Distraction is difficult to deal with. It can slow one down and make even the simplest task a virtual impossibility. Understanding and integrating a well-known story of the Tzemach Tzedek helps one to focus on the present moment and the task he or she is needed for. And that's the story where the Tzemach Tzedek told someone who wanted to move to Israel, Mach Doretz Israel, make this place Israel. And the writer of this essay goes on to discuss, like he says, it struck me one evening suddenly and unexpectedly. It happened as I held my son cradled on the crook of my arm, rocking him to sleep. However, all the while my attention was focused on the phone in my hand. The dissonance of the situation was blaringly obvious all of a sudden. Here I was consumed by my little device, by the little device in my hand, and totally ignoring my child, my precious angel asleep in my arms. Quickly, I pocketed the phone and held my child close to my heart and tried to transmit fatherly feelings of warmth to him. And then he continues about how over the next few days I noticed the same phenomenon repeating itself in various settings. I'm in the middle of praying and how I get distracted and so on. Goes on to explain that focusing on the moment, not where you need to be, where you should be, where you think you should be. You are here, God put you here, this time, this place. This is what you should be doing. Very nicely presented in a very practical way, especially with all the distractions of our lives today. And basically the fact that the trust again in God about where you are, why you're here at this point. And concludes, I would get distracted because I did not place value on the task at hand. Powerfully stated. Concludes with a methodology about how one can meditate and integrate this idea into their lives. And again, a well-done essay, which I recommend all of you to read. Finally, the third essay in Hebrew, Productive Thinking, Chassidus Applied, written by Daniel Chassidim, 19 years old, Yeshiva Tiferes Shraga, Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, Israel. And this one is really about the power of thought and how so much of our thoughts go toward negative things, and the ability to channel our thought as the first of the three garments, thought, speech, action, into positive things. So it's really about positive thinking and productive thinking. And again, nicely done. Obviously dealing and addressing issues like whether it's depression or other negative feelings, and how mind and how your mind control can have such a power to transform and to channel your way of thinking. And that's essay 3. And with that, we will conclude MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 139. Everyone be blessed with a very wonderful Chodesh Kislev, Chodesh Chassidic, Chodesh Kislev, one that illuminates with a light from within to fulfilling our mission in this world. And I want to again repeat something I've asked the question the last few weeks. What are the 3 greatest challenges facing us today? Please submit your anonymous, if you wish, response at meaningfullife.com/mylife, as well as any questions or comments you'd like to submit. You can do that there as well. And we're gathering together the hundreds of responses we received to address what are the 3 greatest challenges facing our community or facing individuals in our community, any way you see it. And with that, as I said, it should be a very freilich Chodesh Kislev, and we should celebrate together. Finally have the Gula Amitis Vashlema from this Chodesh HaGeula, the 3rd month. And until next week, every week, MyLife Chassidus Applied, 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone have a blessed week. Thank you.